You're listening to the Pithy Chronicle. History with a bite. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. And we bring you history's dirtiest deeds, dripping with sarcasm.
Are you hungry yet? Welcome back, Pithy listeners. We are so excited for our second intratempora, the most debaucherous popes.
Okay, but debaucherous how? You've got to tell me, how are they debauched?
So I will... So many ways. So many ways. So the reason I am saying debaucherous is because I was going to go scandalous, but honestly, I couldn't narrow it down to 10. I definitely couldn't narrow it down to 5. The popes just bleed scandal.
I love this.
So I have to be more specific. Debaucherous. I want to talk about their sex lives. I want to get in. I want to get under the bed sheets.
That's Caroline.
They're not all old. Some of them were in their late teens and early 20s.
I'm sorry, there was a pope in their late teens?
Mm-hmm. His daddy bought it for him.
Oh my gosh.
So, debauchery. Because while popes can be scandalous in many ways, and most of these guys were also not awesome popes to begin with.
They were not paragons of virtue, let's put it that way.
They weren't drinking the Kool-Aid. They were giving it out to other people.
Or maybe
and then they were drinking gin in the back.
Yeah, they were drinking too much of the communion wine.
Let's go in chronological order for the top 5. And I really say top with quotes because it's just 5 that I thought were interesting. There are so many wonderfully terrible popes out there. Don't feel that your search should be limited. John the 12th. He lived from 930, maybe as late as 937, to 964. So wasn't all that old by the time he kicked the bucket. He was pope for 9 years from 955 to 964. So if we do the math, how old was he?
25 at the oldest.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
He was from a powerful Roman family, which really dominated the papal politics during this time and had for the past 50 years. He was born Octavianus.
Ooh.
Whoa. Son of Alberic II of Spoleto, and his father was a patrician, so one of the ruling families, the old families of Rome. He then took over that role as the secular prince of Rome when his father died.
So at this point, just to clarify, the Pope has consolidated power. They are both secular and spiritual head of the papal states.
This is a big time for popes. They really have a lot of power compared to pretty much everybody else. Mm-hmm. His mother may have been the wife of his father. She also might have been a concubine, and that's the discrepancy in the dates of his birth. If he was the wife's child, then he was crowned when he was only 18 years old as pope.
Holy cow.
But if he was the concubine's, he could have been in his mid-20s.
So we don't even know if he's a legitimate heir.
No, we do not. But the dad definitely treated him like so. So the dad was Mr. Important. He desperately wanted his son to be pope. He ruled Rome. He got all these factions to kind of come together. He was powerful. And so before his death in 954, he made the Roman nobles in St. Peter's Cathedral swear an oath that the next vacancy for the papal chair would go to his son, Octavian or Octavianus. And you can tell by the name that there were lofty goals.
Yeah, there was
kid.
some...
You don't name your kid after Augustus without feeling
pretty sure of yourself.
Peacocky.
And isn't this kind of incestuous marriage between his dad and the mom?
Yes.
Yeah, it was a little close for comfort.
His wife was Alda of Vienne, and she was technically the dad's stepsister and the daughter of the king of Italy.
Interesting. Consolidating power.
And Icky.
Not like Cousin Icky.
Not Cousin Icky, because they weren't technically related, stepsister, but still. The dad then dies in 954, and his son becomes the prince of the Romans, this secular position. 1 year later, in 955, Pope Agapetus II died, and Octavian, who was guaranteed the throne based on Dad's last wishes, succeeded him somewhere between 18 and 25 years old.
Oh, wow. And he was a cardinal, though, right? It wasn't like he was some person off the street.
Ish.
But, I mean, he probably got purchased the cardinalship.
Yeah, I mean, if he was 18, he hadn't done a whole heck of a lot. No.
Yeah.
He is, interestingly, only the third pope in history to take a regnal name. Octavianus becomes John the 12th, and he used these names separately because he was both this secular prince and this non-secular prince, basically.
Fascinating.
Octavianus, or Octavian, was for his Roman family business, and John was for all the papal stuff.
I mean, at least he's doing some sort of separation.
Thank goodness. He did really want to be a powerful pope, a ruler pope. His father had been this big personality, and these were big shoes to fill, both secular and non. So in 960, he personally led an attack against the Lombard duchies of Benevitum and Capua. He was probably trying to reclaim some places that had been lost to the papal states earlier. But the dukes were like, no. They went to Gisulf of Salerno, who agreed to help them. And this really kind of scared Pope John, so he negotiated and pulled back, and that was basically the end of that. But this episode shows what he struggled to do. He always had these grand plans, but he couldn't...
Some performance anxiety. He couldn't get it up? Is that what you were going to say? He couldn't keep it up at the high holy
He couldn't
gates?
get it up. He just couldn't get his papal scepter to stand up straight. Except when there were women involved. He was very good at that. There was another instance where he was attacked by the King of Italy. He became overwhelmed, and he appealed to Otto I of Germany for help.
Oh, like Charlemagne's Otto.
Yes, indeed. And he said, I will crown you Holy Roman Emperor if you'll help me out against the King of Italy here. He's in the way. And he was like, oh, sure, no problem. But then eventually they weren't friends anymore because Otto I, Holy Roman Emperor at this point, suggested to John the 12th, Pope, that he should be kind of more papal. Perhaps shouldn't be so adulterous.
Oh.
John ignored him, but then he began to get concerned about how much power the Holy Roman Emperor that he had crowned really had now. So then he went behind Otto's back and started to coordinate with the King of Italy that had been attacking him in the first place. So he's a bit of a D.
Well, I mean, peace was happening.
Yep.
You can't beat that international cooperation.
Otto finds out, decides to attack Rome. John could not protect Rome. None of the Roman patricians were behind him anymore because he had squandered away all the goodwill his father had earned. He tries to mount this revolt after he's kicked out of Rome. It fails, and they lost so badly, tons of people are killed. Then he dies.
Okay, none of this is salacious or debaucherous, just crappy.
He died during sex.
Okay.
Did that help?
Somewhat, but I expected a little more. You sold me high and
okay,
high
all
on
right.
this.
What did he do? Why is he on this list?
Why is he on this list?
He was known as a coarse, immoral man, and he really leaned toward the secular prince part rather than the Catholic priest part.
Okay.
His papal palace is referred to in many documents as a brothel. He was believed to be a moral corrupter of Rome. And Otto I, when he was super angry with the Pope that he had tried to help and then had been stabbed in the back by, came up with a list of complaints calling him to come to trial. John said he wouldn't come to trial, and Otto was like, fine, then I am going to hunt you down. So here are some of Otto's charges.
Okay.
He celebrated Mass without taking communion.
Oh, how dare he.
He ordained a deacon in a horse stable.
My gosh, our Lord and Savior was born in a manger.
I'm just going to say that all the lists start with those two, and I feel that they should have just waited a little bit because he took payments to ordain bishops, including one from a 10-year-old boy. He fornicated with a number of widows, his father's own concubine, and also his niece.
Wow, a reoccurrence of the hunkle.
He went hunting publicly, and I have no idea why that's bad, but they put it in here with the adultery, so...
Yeah.
He blinded his confessor, which eventually killed the poor man. He killed a cardinal subdeacon after castrating him.
Oh, gosh.
He supposedly set fires, girded a sword, and donned a helmet and armor, which, of course, the Pope is not supposed to be.
Yeah, the Pope is not allowed to do. He's
Yeah,
supposed to ride everywhere on a donkey.
He is said to have toasted to the devil with wine. Clerics claim to have seen this. While gambling, he invoked Jupiter, Venus, and other demons. And he didn't celebrate matins at the canonical hour, nor did he make the sign of the cross.
Well, he simply must be a demon. I also see that he turned a sacred place into a whorehouse. Is he talking about the Vatican?
I think that's what they're talking about.
Got it.
So, how he died, two different thoughts. One, heart attack during sex, or stroke, perhaps. Okay. Other, angry husband.
Oh, but it doesn't, we don't know.
We don't know.
Do we know of anything people say about him? Obviously, Otto is a little biased.
Yeah.
So do we have any other quotes about him?
We have some quotes about him from some of the popes that followed in his footsteps, although perhaps they did a better job. John XII was a robber, a murderer, and an incestuous person unworthy to represent Christ upon the pontifical throne. This abominable priest soiled the chair of St. Peter for 9 entire years and deserved to be called the most wicked of popes.
My goodness.
John's princely instincts were stronger than his taste for spiritual duties, and the two natures, that of Octavian and that of John XII, stood in unequal conflict. The Lateran Palace was turned into an abode of riot and debauchery.
The last one is really good. His youth, the greatness of his father, and the tragic discords of his position claim for him a lenient judgment. So
they're saying a lenient judgment is in like we shouldn't judge him too harshly.
Because
he was young, because he had these big shoes to fill, and because he was in this unhappy position of being both secular and non-secular rulers. I call bullshit. I just don't think that's a good enough reason.
It's not an excuse.
That is some historian's perspective. There is also an interesting tidbit. He had a mistress who was quite famous named Joan.
Oh,
and there is some belief that she was the inspiration for the legendary female Pope Joan.
I see.
She had a lot of influence, and she was around for a long time during his papacy. So,
there you have that.
Number 2, Benedict the Ninth.
Okay.
From 1012 to 1056. About 50 years after our last dude.
Okay.
He was born Theophylactus.
Sounds like he can't drink milk.
It does sound like he has
It sounded a little bit like
lactose intolerant issues.
Theophylactus.
Theophylactus of Tusculum in Rome. He was a nephew to 2 popes and a grandnephew to 1 more.
Oh, so he's like papal royalty.
And he's gonna earn it because he was pope not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Oh my God, how do you manage that?
1032 and 1048. Oh, I'm gonna tell you. He was also, most notably, the only man to have ever sold the papacy.
That's rather reminiscent of Jacob selling their birthright to Esau, isn't it?
It's biblical.
It is biblical.
The first time he was pope was from 1032 to 1044. So the first one was the best run.
Sounds like it.
He started around 20 years old, and he is obviously one of the youngest popes in history, though not the youngest. He was the nephew of his predecessor, John the 19th. So Benedict's daddy just said, okay, John, when you die, it's obviously going to be my kid. And John was like, absolutely.
Yeah, no problem.
Keeled over, and then everybody was cool with this. But he had really bad behavior, and so the Romans revolted, and they actually drove him out of Rome. Sylvester III was elected to succeed him. The second time he was pope was just for a little bit in 1045, only a year later.
Okay.
Months after he was expelled from Rome, he mounted a comeback and pushed out Sylvester III. And then he decided, poping is hard work. So he decided to resign in favor of his godfather, Gregory VI, who reimbursed him for the papacy.
Fascinating.
However, he changed his mind, as young men are wont to do. So he tried to take it back from his godfather, who was pretty PO'd because he just paid for it.
Yeah.
And in the end, it created a lot of chaos. So King Henry III of Germany was asked to come in and evaluate the situation and find a pope. He gets there, he has this Council of Sutri, and decides that Benedict IX, Sylvester III, and Gregory VI were all deposed. And then he installed a new guy, Pope number 4, Clement II in 1046. But Clement II died a few weeks later.
So we have more to go.
We're back! Benedict seized the Lateran Palace, which is the main papal residence at the time, but it didn't last because German troops from King Henry III came in and drove him out of the city and replaced him with another pope, Damasus II.
Wow.
Post-papacy number 3, he was called to have charges against him. It's very reminiscent of our last guy, isn't it? He was supposed to answer to charges of simony, which obviously is quite valid based on his former actions.
You can't be selling church offices.
But he refused, and he was excommunicated, and we're not sure what happened after
Oh, wow.
Into the ethos.
We can know what happened to his soul.
Yeah, although he's buried in the Abbey of Grottaferrata, and the abbot there claimed that he was penitent in the end.
Aren't we all? Anyways,
Debauchery.
So debauchery.
Quote, "It seemed as if a demon from hell, in the disguise of a priest, occupied the chair of Peter and profaned the sacred mysteries of religion by his insolent courses."
Ooh.
He was accused from other clerics of being a rapist, a murderer, and a violent sodomite.
Oh my.
There is, however, some debate.
I mean,
some of these allegations, especially the fun debaucherous ones, were exaggerated or kind of created over time to make him worse. One historian points out that the further out in time you go, the worse his character becomes. So his contemporaries didn't describe him nearly as badly as those who came after. Sixtus IV. Born Francesco della Rovere to a very prominent family, 1414 to 1484. He was pope then from 1471 until his death. And he did a number of really good things, and I do think we should highlight them. He constructed the Sistine Chapel.
important.
Important, we all agree. He created the Vatican's library.
Also important.
Big deal. He restored Rome's aqueduct so that they could have clean, healthy drinking water.
There you go.
And he was a patron of the arts and brought together some of the leading artists of the early Renaissance.
And then
he did some not so good things, like founding the Spanish Inquisition.
Yep, not a good thing.
Annulling the decrees of the Council of Constance, which had ended the Western Schism. So he went back on that.
Yeah.
Signed off on slavery by granting the Portuguese the rights to acquire slaves on the African coast by force or trade. And he then argued for the ideology of conquest.
So we can literally trace this horrible situation back to this one man.
This guy.
Wow.
Sixtus IV. He also was a big fan of nepotism, as most popes were. But it was rampant. He originally joined the Franciscan order, which was an unlikely choice if you wanted to be political. It was a very humble order of priests.
Okay.
He taught philosophy and theology and was renowned for his unworldliness and reputation for piety.
All right.
So far, not all that debaucherous.
Yeah, doing it by the book.
But then he was elected at age 54 to succeed Paul II.
Respectable age, you've seen life.
So here we go. The first thing he does is to announce a new crusade. And it's fruitless.
Well, yeah.
The next big thing he does is nepotism. He strengthened his position by surrounding himself with relatives. His nephews became extremely prominent, even though most of them weren't cardinals.
Wasn't Julius II one of his,
Probably.
Yeah, because he was also a double rovere.
You're right. Julius II. There you go.
Yeah.
He had a nephew, Pietro Riario, who became the richest man in Rome, thanks to Sixtus's foreign policy, of which he was the advisor.
Oh, cash.
He gave his nephews lordships, he arranged marriages to prominent women.
Which, let's be fair, that is kind of within their purview. It's not like that's never been done before. That's not particularly debauched.
It's not debauched, but 6 of the 34 cardinals that he created were nephews.
Now that
It's not debauched, but it's not great.
It's not good.
He was heavily involved in the Pazzi conspiracy of 1478 that was a failed assassination attempt for both Lorenzo de' Medici and his brother Giuliano. And they hoped that they would replace these 2 pillars of the Florentine community with another nephew of Sixtus.
My God, how many nephews did this man
Man had a shit ton of nephews. The main organizer of the plot was then hanged from the Florentine Palazzo, and Sixtus was super mad about this, because how dare you punish the guy that I sent to assassinate your leaders?
Yeah.
So he waged war on Florence for 2 years.
And who won?
Stalemate. Nothing happened. He just was a jerk for 2 years.
Fair enough.
Personal scandal.
Okay.
Debauchery. Why is he on the list? The Italian historian Stefano Infessura, in the Diary of the City of Rome, claimed that Sixtus was a lover of boys and sodomites. He has been accused of granting benefices and bishoprics in return for sexual favors.
Oh my, so even worse than simony.
You know, what you got for me? That was great. Lots of the new young cardinals were celebrated for their good looks.
Oh.
However, again, is it reliable? It's hard to say. But an English clergyman a century later attributed to Sixtus the authorization to practice sodomy during periods of warm weather.
Only in the summer.
In winter, it's back to...
You know what? Everyone needs a vacation.
And then he died.
Here you are.
He had an illness and it worsened and he died in 4 days. Innocent the 8th. Not so innocent.
No.
He was pope from 1484 to 1492, so he followed right after little Sixtus here. He was born Giovanni Battista Cibo, and he was the son of the viceroy of Naples. He was of Greek and Genoese ancestry, and he became a cardinal in 1473 by the to-be pope Julius II. In his early life, he lived at this Neapolitan court, and that is where he got into his debaucherous fun.
Oh, so before he was pope.
Before he was pope, but not before. He should have known better. He hadn't taken holy orders, but he was a cardinal, so.
I mean, don't you have
I didn't know you could do both.
Okay.
He fathered quite a few. I've read up to 7 illegitimate children.
Okay.
But at some point, I guess he became reformed and he decided to enter the priesthood. Again, despite being already a cardinal. His election was very contentious. Bribes were flying, deals were made behind closed doors, but he won and pretty much immediately had a conflict with King Ferdinand I of Naples.
Okay.
Then Francis Charles VIII came to intervene, and in the end, he excommunicated Ferdinand, and the conflict that he began didn't end until well after his death. He was a bit mischievous. He also had a lot to say about witchcraft.
Did he participate?
Damn it, no. That would have been amazing. He did not call when gambling to Venus and Jupiter, but he did issue a papal bull that supported the investigations into witchcraft. Quote, "It has recently come to our ears, not without great pain, that in some parts of Upper Germany, many persons of both sexes, heedless of their own salvation and forsaking the Catholic faith, give themselves over to devils, male and female, and by their incantations, charms, and conjurings, ruin and cause to perish the offspring of women, the foal of animals, the products of the earth, the grapes of the vines, and the fruits of the trees, as well as men and women, cattle and flocks, and herds of animals of every kind."
Well.
So, get him. He also had a very captivating situation.
Oh, this is a bad pun.
But it's good because he held him captive.
Okay.
In 1489, the brother of the Ottoman Empire's Sultan, Bayezid II, came into, somehow, the Pope's custody. So he, found the brother.
This is after the conquest.
It is. So the Sultan
post-conquest.
was like, oh, this is not great. Please don't let him go. He's my rival. So he paid the Pope to keep him a captive.
Oh.
He paid him 120,000 crowns, which was equal to the annual revenue of the Vatican at the time.
Oh my gosh.
Gave him some holy relics, just threw them in to sweeten the deal.
I have these in Constantinople. I don't need these.
There you go. And then he gave him an annual sum that is unspecified. But then, anytime the Sultan threatened war against Christianity, because again, we are in that place where the conquest has happened and there is this serious border and struggle and stress.
Like Vlad the Impaler. That's what he was doing at this point. I'm actually watching a very fascinating documentary on it right now. Netflix, about how Mehmed II was trying to really grow his empire and how Vlad was counteracting that. And I will say, we got it all right. And we didn't have a Netflix budget, just saying.
We did not have a Netflix. That would be amazing. Did you know we have a Patreon account?
I did. I update it.
And swag as well. You can get swag on our website.
That's
Anyway,
right.
Speaking of budgets. Okay, so the Sultan, anytime he would threaten to wage war against Christianity, the Pope would be like, well, that's fine. I'll just release your brother.
Yeah.
You won't mind if he comes and fights you for the throne, right? But eventually, Pope Alexander VI, who was Innocent's successor, did release the brother into the custody of King Charles's army, and the poor man died. Poisoning? Pneumonia? Hard to say.
Yeah.
What else did he do that was bad? Well, slavery. Renaissance popes went back and forth on slavery. It was very wishy-washy. They were unsure where the papacy stood in terms of slavery. But Innocent really had a very strict view. He was cool with it. King Ferdinand of Aragon gave him, the Pope, 100 Moorish slaves, whom he then shared/loaned out to his favorite
Oh, that's
cardinals.
awful. That is a terrible awful.
It's not good, no. He did, as we said, have a family, and we don't mean his parents. He had 7 illegitimate children. They were all born before he entered the clergy, but after he was given these big cardinalships and bishoprics and things that you would think you needed to be ordained for. And actually, he tried not to be ordained for as long as possible to continue living his debaucherous lifestyle. He only acknowledged or legitimized 2 of them, and towards those 2 specifically, he was incredibly nepotistic, arranging for his son to marry Lorenzo de' Medici's daughter, and Savonarola chastised him for his worldly ambitions, and basically pointed to him as the worst of the worst, and the reason the papacy had to go.
And Savonarola was about to get real heated with our next guy, too.
All those books just create such a
No pun intended.
Alexander VI, born Rodrigo de Borgia, 1431 to 1503. He was from a Spanish family.
Which was very much a no for the papacy.
It was something that he was always trying to overcome. He was pope from 1492 to 1503, and while his family was Spanish, it was still a very prominent papal family.
Much to everyone's chagrin. His uncle was the Pope, Pope Calixtus III.
And then a year later, he became the vice chancellor for the Catholic Church, and he spent nearly 40 years plotting, amassing huge wealth, dealing with worldly items that really shouldn't have been within a cardinal's purview, until finally he got to be the Pope.
Well, and man, he used those kids as political pawns better than some kings.
He does have a personal life, as Erica said. He fathered several children by many mistresses. His name is synonymous today with nepotism and libertinism. It's really just not great for popely behavior. And then he used his kids to do everything else. From his favorite mistress, Vanozza de Catanai, he had 4 children that he acknowledged: Cesare, Giovanni, Lucrezia, and Geoffrey. He pretended that these 4 children originally were nieces and nephews after he became pope, but pretty much let that facade go quickly.
Yeah.
He loved them, he lavished money and positions on them. There are rumors, but not founded, that he had incestuous relationships with his own stunningly beautiful daughter, whom he married off
3 times.
And he killed at least 2 of the husbands.
He didn't kill the first one. Even though he allegedly beat Lucrezia, he just had him to come in front of all of the cardinals and prove that he was impotent. Or
prove you can't get it up.
And he couldn't.
He couldn't rise to that occasion. And then he killed the second one.
Let's be fair, though. He was in front of a bunch of old, gross men, just naked
That's not the time.
Waist down? I don't know.
It would be easy to prove in that moment.
Yes.
That things didn't rise. But it was very embarrassing, and it kind of ruined his family, so that's not nice. He also had a daughter with Giulia Farnese, Laura Orsini, but he did not acknowledge her in the same way that he did with the others.
But he was obsessed with Giulia Farnese. And even
he thought she was stunning.
There is some evidence to prove that she actually had a really good mind for numbers and helped him kind of with the sale of indulgences.
And with getting the papacy back on a wealthy footing.
Yeah, because at the time it was not.
He also had 6 other illegitimate children with unknown mothers. That brings his total, if we're counting, to 11.
Ooh.
Thanks to all of his illegitimate children and his love of nepotism, he can actually be traced back as an ancestor to almost all the royal houses of Europe.
Yep.
So the man spread his seed.
Lucrezia ended up being the Duchess of Ferrara, which is where a lot of the royals then traced their line, because it was the d'Este family, which is a very prominent family.
During his time as pope, he had a very controversial papacy, perhaps one of the most controversial. He reconfirmed the rights of the Spanish crown in the New World post-Columbus. He supported his son Cesare Borgia as a condottiero for the French king, or a mercenary captain. And all the foreign policy that he did was destructive, violent, and for his own family, not for the Vatican.
Yeah, and Cesare Borgia was the subject of Machiavelli's The Prince, so...
Yeah, Cesare's a whole other podcast.
Whole other thing.
But I will say that Cesare and his father dined together, and that night they both became very ill. Cesare lay in his bed with his skin peeling and his face changing to a violet color due to whatever drastic medical measures they took to cure him. He eventually recovered. However, Alexander did not. He died at 72 with his beloved son Cesare. He did have his last rites, and he confessed quite a few sins. Evidently, he was verbose in the end.
Just to illustrate how debauched those two were in their scheming together, you have the Banquet of Chestnuts, which some historians now say are apocryphal. But I believe where there's smoke, there's fire. They had these lavish banquets with prostitutes, and they would do these very unseemly for churchmen acts. And then they would have people waiting behind the walls taking notes on who did what so they could blackmail them later.
They would encourage these bad behaviors and then use them as blackmail. It was also accused that his Vatican palace was more like a harem.
Yep.
And that, my friends, is that. We hope you've enjoyed this
little walk down debauchery lane.
Exactly. Hope you've learned a lot. I certainly have. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. And we are pithily yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!